Boom, great. Okay, so welcome everyone to the Global Hip Hop Meeting Room, talking about admitting people. This is our monthly special event, and so we're very lucky to have someone from the CIPHER project, Dr. Griffith. I'm going to say your name wrong at the very end, but Rollefson, and he'll be talking about the publication that will be released very shortly about it in ethnomusicology or ethnomusicology, correct? In the journal? Great, okay. So that's going to be very exciting. So he'll be presenting on the article, and I'll send it out in the chat. Or actually, you should have gotten it through email. So if you want it, then I can send it again. And so it will be an hour presentation with 30 minutes of questions. And so I'll let Griff take over. And again, thank you very much for coming. And if you want to not be recorded or heard, you can turn off your camera and your microphone. So that all being said, Griff, take it away.
Thanks a lot, John. And thanks. It's good to see you, Jaspal and Rachel. We met for 30 seconds in Kitakyushu a few months ago. But thank you all for being here. Maybe as I'm going to put up some slides. So I just gave a talk on campus here. And basically the talk was, I kind of Frankenstein together some introduction from this article that we wrote together as a team, and then thought, well, I don't want to present other people's. It's the article that's forthcoming in ethnomusicology this fall has 4 case studies of from me and other members of the CIPHER team here at University College Cork in Ireland, and I thought, well, I will. Instead of speaking on their behalf for that, when I get to the body of the article with those case studies, I just turn to some recent field work that I've done that does both in Japan and in Bangkok and in Mozambique very recently, and in addition to some of the European work that I've done. So thank you for having me all, and I'm probably going to freestyle a little bit of it, but I have a massive paper that went too long earlier that I'll sort of excerpt from. But let me start by seeing if I can share my screen here, and maybe we'll test the audio as well. Okay, tab, share tab audio.
Yeah, I think you should present now at the bottom.
Yep, I've got that, but now let me see. I've got too many tabs open. Where's the PowerPoint? Oh, let's see, share a Chrome tab. No, I don't want to share a tab. I want to share a window. There we go.
There we go.
Am I live?
Yep. Very good.
All right, let me make sure I've got some sound. Let me know if this sounds good, John.
People be asking me all the time.
Yep, that's good.
What happened with hip hop?
That was it? Could you hear that?
Yes, everything's good.
You could hear the most def there.
Yep.
All right, sweet. All right. So thanks again, all of you, for having me. I'll get into it here. In August 2019, the CIPHER team at UCC began laying the groundwork for a first-of-its-kind global networking and mapping of hip-hop knowledge flows. With funding from the European Union, the team of researchers developed a method synergizing community-engaged scholarship with crowdsourcing and digital humanities methods. By conducting ethnographic research in collaboration with artists, hip-hop communities, NGOs, and other stakeholders around the planet, the team identifies and examines local gems are shorthand for the smallest units of hip-hop knowledge, in nuanced ethnographic and contextual detail, and then networks these gems via thematic and archetypal interrelations. This CIPHER method suggests that it's the shared but ever-changing knowledge base of these diverse but conceptually interrelated gems that connects and animates the diverse communities that comprise the global hip-hop nation. In this presentation, which builds on a forthcoming article in the journal Ethnomusicology, I elaborate the intertextual methodology by modeling my working definitions of gems, the things themselves, gem tags, the conceptual themes, and gem networks, the interrelationships and heat maps that emerge between gems and gem tags, as I prepare for the cultural data analytics phase of the CIPHER project. I should say here that, or actually maybe I say it later, but we haven't actually gotten the data analytics side of this up and running yet, but we have a hire coming in at the end of this month that will actually start to operationalize a lot of this stuff. So I begin with a show and tell of examples from my fieldwork in Ireland, Italy, the US, Japan, Thailand, Mozambique, and beyond, to give you all a sense of the diverse discourses, embodied knowledges, and material cultures of global hip-hop, and track these interconnected knowledges, archetypes, and mythemes, these gems, looking to see how hip-hop calls out to and resonates with communities around the world. For the purposes of this afternoon's presentation, I conclude with a focus on a gem of anti-colonial critique, Foreigner in My Own Country. I track this gem in its various iterations, localizations, and re-territorializations from Ireland's Denise Chaila, she's the one side-eyeing with Fanon there, to Germany's Advanced Chemistry and Italy's Sangue Misto, before looking at a potential source, Fanon's 1956 letter to the resident minister, published in his collection Toward the African Revolution. In concluding, I explain my theory of hip-hop interpolation and sociogenesis derived from the work of Louis Althusser and Frantz Fanon. To do so, I show how these gems translate and resonate with people around the world because they communicate a similar identity of passions. I track this idea of an identity of passions from Ralph Ellison to Paul Gilroy to George Lipsitz that speak to what Raymond Williams might have termed post-colonial structures of feeling. In short, following Pennycook and Mitchell, I look to show how these people and their storytelling traditions were already hip-hop, and more broadly, to model how culture works. A big ask, I know. Before I begin, I want to recognize and thank the amazing team of scholars and support staff that's facilitated this global work during particularly challenging times. CIPHER launched with postdoctoral Africa Middle East specialist Warwick Moses and Asia Pacific specialist Jace Ng. Soon thereafter, Stephen Gamble joined on a Marie Curie-funded project about hip-hop on the internet, and Ophelia McCabe joined as an arts practice PhD researcher, examining freestyle rappers. This CIPHER Team 1.0 developed many of the ideas that I'll discuss today, and they were the ones who wrote the case studies that comprise the article on which this presentation is based. Over the past year or two, the team added Latin American Circum-Caribbean specialist Gustavo Souza Marques and Marie Curie scholars Yana Rantala, working on political memory in Mozambican hip-hop, and James McNally, working on a revisionist history of hip-hop's golden age in New York's Black suburbia, Long Island. Most recently, Dee Malloy joined the team working on an arts practice PhD project, tracking Afro-diasporic dance codes. Additionally, the team has benefited greatly from the administrative support of Maria Fitzgerald Houlihan and later Siobhan O'Brien, and the pilot computational work of Dave Brown. So shout out to those heads, and couldn't have done it without you. That data analytics work, as I mentioned, will come to fruition over the final year of the project under the expert direction of incoming computer scientist Shyam Sundar LB, who starts later this month. This presentation will focus on the CIPHER project's methodological and theoretical design and findings, so I won't get into the structural details of the grant beyond what's relevant. That said, I'm open to adding more detail and answering you and answering your questions later as we get into the Q&A. For now, thank you all so much to all of those colleagues, to Barry O'Sullivan at the Insight Center for Data Analytics, and others who helped, including the CIPHER's advisory board and the editorial board of CIPHER's primary output thus far, the new journal Global Hip Hop Studies, which maybe we can talk about later. And I've got the links for you to check out on the last slide here. In the article on which this presentation is based, me and members of the CIPHER team detail and model our GEM-centered methodology and the research team's community-engaged scholarly praxis, presenting preliminary findings in 4 interrelated case studies. Those case studies offer up examples of hip-hop knowledge flows that evidence a global dialogue between New York and Ireland, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Togo, Narm, Melbourne, Egypt, the UK, Oakland, Puerto Rico, and beyond. Through these examples, we demonstrate how the CIPHER method of tracking thematic, conceptual, and archetypal relationships between far-flung communities might help us better understand hip-hop's globalization. We conclude that the performative gems that emerge in these studies are key in understanding hip-hop's broad and open source appeal. Further, we argue that these gems of knowledge perform ideas that urgently need to be amplified, actively listened to, and heeded, be they figurations of ancient cosmologies like yin and yang on the left there, traditional epistemes like Third Eye, anti-colonial slogans like Pataphysics Fuck Captain Cook, post-colonial critiques like Denise Chila's On Shah, or empowering digital memes celebrating Mo Salah. Today's presentation will draw from our collaborative work on that article, but then turn to case studies from my own ethnographic work in Italy, Japan, Thailand, and Mozambique. The CIPHER name. The CIPHER methodology is encoded in the title of the project. As Cheryl Keyes details in the first ethnomusicological monograph on hip-hop, rap music, and street consciousness, a CIPHER is defined as a feedback circle formed whenever 3 or more people gather to perform, challenge, and empower each other. A CIPHER can happen across any of hip-hop's traditional 4 elements, between DJs or beat makers at a beat battle, MCs in a freestyle CIPHER, B-girls and boys at a breaking event, or aerosol artists at a graffiti jam. Indeed, a CIPHER can also be cultivated in a hip-hop classroom where students are asked to do the knowledge and build on the well-developed discourse around hip-hop's 5th element. As such, the CIPHER is the basic unit of hip-hop community. Yet there's another definition of CIPHER in hip-hop. It's also the coded knowledge created by hip-hop communities. The CIPHER is thus the basic unit of hip-hop community and the basic unit of hip-hop knowledge. It's both the physical site of hip-hop community and the conceptual terrain of hip-hop knowledge production. As the critically acclaimed Mos Def put it in 1999, we are hip-hop. Me, you, everybody. We are hip-hop. So hip-hop is going where we're going. Let's listen to how he puts it.
People be asking me all the time, yo, Mo, what's going to happen with hip-hop? I tell them, you know what's going to happen with hip-hop? Whatever's happening with us. If we smoked out, hip-hop is going to be smoked out. If we doing all right, hip-hop is going to be doing all right. People talk about hip-hop like it's some giant living in the hillside, coming down to visit town with people. We are hip-hop. Me, you, everybody. We are hip-hop. So hip-hop is going where we going. So the next time you ask yourself where hip-hop is going, ask yourself,
where am I going?
How am I doing? And you get a clear idea.
So this presentation elaborates the methodological approach that allows the research team of regional hip-hop specialists to approach CIPHER's central research question. Why is this highly localized and iconically authenticizing African-American music translated so widely to far-flung communities and contexts around the globe? Spady, Alim, and Magelli approach this question thus in their decidedly emic tome, The Global CIPHER, Hip-Hop Culture and Consciousness, where they write, hip-hop is always both local and global, yet it gains particular relevance to the lives of youth worldwide in the process of becoming local. That is, it It is through hip-hop's localization that we can begin to see the limitless yet local horizons of significance for these diverse youth communities of practice. Localization forces us to contend with the on-the-ground realities, the specific ethnographic contexts, and the socio-political arrangement of the relations between language use, identities, and power. Building on the work of landmark interviews and essays in this global hip-hop collection, CIPHER picks up this methodological focus on localization and artist engagement, what Spady calls hip-hopography, and further develops its theory. Indeed, on the theory side, CIPHER posits the hip-hop interpolation thesis that, quote, hip-hop spreads not as a copy of a Black American original, but through its performance of knowledge, emerges as an always already constituent part of local knowledge and practice, as people around the world are hailed into hip-hop consciousness. To explain how this hailing happens, CIPHER remixes Louis Althusser's theory of interpolation, that is, calling into subjectivity, to imagine how hip-hop's global call and response captures the imaginations of local subjects around the world and brings them into a global hip-hop consciousness. While Althusser developed this idea in the tradition of white European critical theory to describe the ideological hails of repressive state regimes, CIPHER flips the script on this European high theory, remixing it with Frantz Fanon's psychoanalytic and practice-based theories of subjectivization, racialization, and consciousness raising. In a word, Fanon's sociogeny, to examine the ways that music and media can call our attention and resonate with us in liberating ways. Indeed, despite Althusser's focus on the hails of and turns toward authoritarian and unethical regimes, we've found in interpolation theory a remarkably useful point of departure for analyzing what Luis Manuel Garcia playfully terms the ethical turn in electronic dance music. That is, he theorizes how we become subjects by responding to musical calls and turning towards them. While other scholars such as Garcia and Adam Haupt have repurposed interpolation theory as a theoretical lens with which to think about the ideological processes of any culture, be it white and authoritarian hegemonic, or Black and democratic counter-hegemonic, it's worth noting that interpolation theory also serves a more pragmatic function in the CIPHER project. As a well-known concept developed by a white French European scholar, the figure of interpolation is immediately legible and valuable to many Euro-American scholars, and thus at the very core of what theory means in a European context. CIPHER's Althusserian Fanonian theoretical assemblage of hip-hop interpolation thus serves as a form of instrumentalized theory that Gayatri Spivak terms affirmative sabotage. In this case, a strategy for accessing funding for Black music research in Europe. In brief, Europe's professoriate, and by extension its flagship ERC research program, is still disproportionately administered by white European scholars. As such, Althusser's theory also functions as a pragmatic tool, as it remains exceedingly unlikely that one would secure a major European Union grant by only citing Fanon, Sylvia Wynter, Paul Gilroy, and other scholars of color, even for a project exploring Black music and culture. The subversive affirmation of this approach thus follows, to mash up Spivak, Audre Lorde, and James Spady: if you have the keys to the master's house, you can smuggle in your bomb squad tapes. The spark for the hip-hop interpolation thesis first hit me during an interview with the Turkish Berliner MC Şefket in 2007, when he explained to me, maybe they didn't know it, but they were speaking to me and my community too. As I described in my first book, Flip the Script, this African-American art form has indeed called out to countless young men and women around the world, finding deep resonance among diverse communities and creating shared cultural currency across borders and between cultures. Instead of a top-down globalization, this music resonates around the globe for the same reasons it resonated with Şefket. For hip-hop ideology proposes that knowledge of self is key to the universal, that the local unlocks the global. Indeed, similar to my interview with Şefket, CIPHER's theory of interpolation takes seriously the widely reported affinities and solidarities of global hip-hop artists like the indigenous Australian MC Wire's seemingly absurd but forthright claim that hip-hop always has been part of his culture, reported in the 2009 study, Global Linguistic Flows. As Wire MC puts it, hip-hop is still the same corroboree, still singing and dancing and telling the same stories about the immediate environment. This is the paradox visualized in the CIPHER team's Sankofa Power logo, which is a riff on a favorite gem of hip-hop knowledge, the Sankofa icon of the Akan people of West Africa. In Akan culture, the symbol signifies the power of self-knowledge, depicting a bird progressing to the future, yet reaching back to its history, depicted as an egg, which holds the dual potential for both sustainability and rebirth. The Sankofa Power logo refigures the egg into the digital universal power symbol, 1 and 0, on and off, uniting an ancient icon with a contemporary icon and signifying hip-hop's globalizing power. Surely those Afro-diasporic post-colonial communities that built the foundations of this culture in post-industrial New York and beyond are at the center of this story and continue to inform hip-hop's global meanings and fuel its global appeal. But as the global gems of our study indicate, hip-hop's localization in diverse contexts around the world is also driven by a recognition of self in this iconic other. Something about the music, dance, and artistic expressions of those Black and brown post-colonial communities in the South Bronx resonated far beyond the 5 boroughs and far beyond the early 1970s. As our findings indicate, the global ethos and ethics that Spady, Alim, and Magali describe encourages artists to find themselves and their cultures in and through hip-hop, to find and fashion hip-hop gems within the contours of on-the-ground local knowledges, forms, and performance practices. That is, by hip-hop's own standards, the most hip-hop thing you can do is to dig where you stand. As we demonstrate in both form and content through a set of networked local case studies, if you dig deep enough, you'll find hip-hop. I'm going to skip a little bit about the ethics of data mining, which has been at the core of our thought, but just suffice it to say, you can check out the article to learn more about that. I thought this would be the best spot, but my involvement in this goes back to a panel with Jeff Chang and Ricky Vincent and an MC friend of mine, Rico Pavon, and one of the founders of Rap Genius, who, as we all know, is no longer Rap Genius, but just Genius. And I get into some of the corporate trouble with that, needless to say. So central to the CIPHER research design is an iterative process that moves between online and sustained on-the-ground ethnographic work with communities around the world. Since lockdowns related to the pandemic impacted our ability to travel internationally just as the project started in earnest, we began by relying on online communications and virtual ethnographic methods, everything from direct communication via Zoom and WhatsApp to recorded artifacts. As in-person fieldwork has commenced, these online methods provide the basis for extended trips to those communities with whom we've been working virtually. As part of those trips, we're not only following up by conducting interviews, attending performances, and working as participant observers, but as a central feature of the CIPHER method, we're conducting workshops, interview performances, and other arts practice methods with the help of local NGOs and cultural authorities to train local stakeholders to participate in analyzing and networking their own local gems of hip-hop knowledge. To this end, I encourage you all to visit CIPHER's public-facing website, globalcipher.org. I'll show that link at the end. Our first point of contact in providing community members with spaces to do the knowledge, add and network local hip-hop gems, collaborate and connect, create and circulate information, and grow the CIPHER. This is all the stuff that's going to be launched in the coming months, especially, but it's already up in sort of beta version form. With the technology serving the community, not the other way around, there will be opportunities to post stories, updates, news releases, data visualizations, and other forms of open knowledge sharing. We'll create an ever-updating and iterative searchable knowledge base created and curated by users with geographic and temporal data visualization tools. If anybody ever used RapStats on the Genius site, the idea is to do searches like RapStats allowed us to do, but then actually be able to click through and see the data, to do time searches as well as geographical searches, basically a much more powerful version of that tool that was a sort of opaque tool. You couldn't see the data behind it. By activating a global cipher of community researchers in this way, we aim to collect, connect, and leverage hip-hop knowledge rather than extracting and monetizing, indeed, which was the Rap Genius's ultimate aim. So in short, the CIPHER method proposes that by analyzing these smallest units of hip-hop knowledge and examining how they travel and translate, we might be able to better understand the global flows, localizing realities, and thus the interpolative process that calls people into hip-hop knowledge, into hip-hop consciousness. As we'll see in the following case studies, I want to propose that this consciousness is an eminently post-colonial and polycultural one, a third space where young men and women are able to compose a new world, not beholden to blood and soil logics of the past, nor, we might note, to the soulless neoliberalism of globalization. As a first sustained example, this approach helps us better understand how and why a cluster of gems around the traditional South Asian concept of the third eye have taken hold in hip-hop ways of knowing. In hip-hop, the appeal of this traditional and archetypal gesture to mind-opening and consciousness-raising is leveraged by artists in a myriad of contemporary hip-hop contexts. We can track how the idea enters hip-hop discourse through 5% Nation metaphysics and emerges in localized guises across the globe and across the elements. From the lyrics of Rakim, as we'll see, and the iconography of Oakland's Hyro crew, to the naming of Marseille's Troisième Œil, the sonics and videos of Birmingham, UK's Jerusalem, and the ideas and album art of Pataphysics. The Melbourne-based artist and co-author, one of our co-authors on the ethnomusicology article. As we'll see, the CIPHER method helps us understand how hip-hop reactivates pre-colonial and indigenous concepts around the world, from each one teach one and yin and yang, to hip-hop's guiding ideological principle of KOS. Further, the method helps us connect more recent revolutionary histories and contemporary decolonial struggles to one another. In this way, we can see how global conceptual archetypes emerge as local gems in local contexts, local languages, and local styles as part of local knowledges and local lifeways. Returning to the Third Eye Gem group and a 2011 iteration from Birmingham, UK, we can see beyond the lyrical gems to the performative contours and diverse imageries of the Third Eye Gem tag. Here, Jerusalem begins an Afrofuturistic quest for knowledge of self by launching himself into space, led by the luminous eyes of a Mesopotamian god mask. The lyrics begin, "Clean the matter from your eye," as he blasts off. We later see that the vessel for this transformational quest is a spaceship in the form of the Egyptological Eye of Horus, a symbol of healing and protection. So let's listen to a little bit of this. Check this out from Juice's Rock Your Hologram.
I am rocking my hologram.
Bring the matter from your eye. Why to ask why, oh why? I'm gonna get loud with your why. Record won't testify, no lie.
There's the Eye of Horus spaceship. Digging back farther in hip-hop history, we find a very early example of a third eye gem in the 1988 Eric B. and Rakim track, Follow the Leader, which draws on the Hindu concept's localization in Nation of Islam belief systems, where Rakim first encountered the idea. Let's listen to this track at length, using this great lyric video to guide our listening. But as we do, settle into the sonic world here as well, focusing on the gems at play. You'll hear musical signifiers of mysticism, like the ethereal timbres and the eeriness created by the minor third major seventh melodic gesture, as well as reverb strings and a rumbling Moog synth in the bass. This context all feeds into the meaning of this particular third eye gem and helps us situate it in the network of signification at play on the track. In other words, although CIPHER starts with this sort of textual analysis, The idea is to get into sonic analysis, embodied analysis, visual analysis, so that we can work across the elements. On this track, you'll also hear metaphysical discourses of superhumanism, outer space cosmologies, third eye enlightenment language, as well as hip-hop consciousness, knowledge of self, and brain and mind expansion language. Further, you'll hear what Juice Aleem once described to me as metaphysical etymologies. These are rhetorical constructions that reify linguistic frames as systems of power, the way, for instance, that overseer equals officer, that we probably all know. I'll stop the video on the line, "My third eye make me shine like jewelry," and we can unpack that gem in relation to a cognate gem field of hip-hop discourse around what I've called words as weapons discourse, and its connection from martial arts, mastery, and nirvana to the idea of literal enlightenment, that is, of glowing and shining as one transcends one's human limitations. All right, let's check out this. And I want us to think about how all of these different, how each lyric connects to this sort of meta gem theme of the third eye, consciousness raising, mind expansion, and how the music supports all that.
Follow me into a solo, get in the flow, and you can picture like a photo. Music makes mellow, maintains and make melodies for MCs, motivates to breaks them everlasting. I can go on for days and days with rhyme displays that engrave deep as X-rays. I can take a phrase that's rarely heard. Flip, now daily word. I can get killer than armor, killing bomb, but no alarm. Rock him with remain calm. Self-esteem make you super superb and supreme before a microphone fill out a fade. This was a pace. I wasn't supposed to break. I was supposed to wait on the sports mate. I want to see you keep following and swallowing. Taking the finish, practice the ball. Brothers tried, others died to get the formula. But I'ma let you sweat, you still ain't harm you. A step away from frozen, stiff as if you're posing. Digging through my brain as the rhyme gets chosen. So follow me, and what you're thinking, you reverse. Let's travel at beneficent speeds around the universe. What can you say as the earth gets further and further away? Planets as small as balls of clay, straying through the Milky Way. World's out of sight, far as the eye can see, not even a satellite. Now stop and turn around and look. At the stand of darkness, your knowledge is full. So keep staring, soon you suddenly see a star, you better follow. It consists of all. This is a lesson. If you guess it, if you follow in, hurry, step right up and keep following. Follow the lead of our chemistry. 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 Follow the lead of. This is a lifetime mission. Vision of prisons. I listen. In this journey, you're the journal, I'm the journalist. Am I eternal or an eternalist? I'm about to flow long as I can possibly go. Keep it moving because the crowd says so. Dance. Cuss, rip your pants, every beat on the place. Call an ambulance. Pull out my weapon and start to squeeze. A magnum as a microphone, murdering MCs. Let's go. A rhyme from my record and go. Follow the leader. Yeah, don't. Cause every time I stop, it seems to duck. Soon as you try to step off, self-destruct. I came to overcome before I'm gone by showing and proving and letting ours be born. Then after that, I'll live forever. You disagree, you say never, then follow me. But for the century, you remember me in history, not a mystery or memory. I come by nature, mind raised in nature. Since you was quick, I have to raise you from the cradle to the grave. But remember, you're not a slave. We're here to be much more than that. But we can see it because our minds trapped. But I'm here to break away the chains, take away the pains, but make the brain rebuild my name. I guess nobody knows a little now. Change this. It can't be mixed, diluted. It can't be taste switch. Here's a lesson if you guess it. Follow it. Hurry, step right up. Follow me. Follow the lead of our chemistry. 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 A verified freestyle, lyrics of fury. My third eye make me shine like jury.
All right, I'm gonna stop it there. As we can see and hear here, Rakim elaborates the title, Follow the Leader, with a litany of ways in which he can teach us. Another gem network that ranges from examples like one of hip hop's favorite African aphorisms, each one teach one, to the name of the hip hop group, Poor Righteous Teachers. The track details his leadership and his mastery of hip hop knowledge, culminating in this line that nods, knowingly or unknowingly, to the 1985 hip hop martial arts film, The Last Dragon, about a Black martial arts practitioner who masters his form and achieves the glow. Again, this is 1985. I was 10 years old. Follow the Leader is 1988. Come to think of it, we better get a little bit of that intertextual linkage in our minds as well. Here's The Glow from Willie Hutch, 1985. Here's The Glow.
Everybody knows that I'm fit. Oh, hello, hello. We know that you get the pop of it. We got the glue, it all be red, it all be wet. I said, no, they know, they know, they know, you got the glue, the glue.
As I'll suggest in concluding, this knowingly or unknowingly, whether Rakim was thinking about the glow or whether this was all part of the same, something in the water, that'll be an important consideration as we conclude. For ultimately, I'll argue that we need to rethink the idea of influence in the individualized sense inherited from hegemonic Western modes of authorship and think more broadly about shared experience. Indeed, this point about individualization offers up a useful point to return to CIPHER's aims, hip-hopographic ethics, and community-centered methods. A standout example of what the CIPHER method can look like in practice is exemplified in the nationally televised documentary about CIPHER's community-engaged arts practice research project, Ubuntu, Local is Global. In collaboration with young people and youth mentors from the local NGOs here in Cork, the Cork Migrant Center, and the Cabin Studio, the project generated new arts outputs and new knowledges by asking young rappers, slam poets, beat makers, dancers, and artists to construct gems themselves around the concept of Ubuntu, a Zulu word for humanity, meaning literally, I am because we are. The decision to focus on this concept emerged from a youth-led discussion about how the global is lived in a local context, and how that experience is akin to how we experience others from the perspective of self. That is, how the construction of the self is informed by our relationship with others. This theme was selected in a brainstorm with the Cork Migrant Center about a large city center mural showing side by side the phrases Black Lives Matter and End Direct Provision, a reference to Ireland's dehumanizing asylum seeker system. This is the image in the upper right corner, Black Lives Matter and Direct Provision. The contextualized recognition of these global and local valences of anti-racism inspired youth mentor and choreographer Andrea Williams to introduce the concept of Ubuntu to our discussion, a concept that many of the CMC's Southern African youth knew in one form or another. And as one of the ethnically Irish youth from the cabin, MC Tiny explained in the documentary, the Ubuntu concept had taken root in his understanding, explaining, quote, I feel like you've learned things from everyone, and they're basically stuck to you. They're part of you, They're with you along the way. The hour-long performance in UCC's Honan Plaza not only created stunning new pieces of art, new understandings, and new iterations of Ubuntu-themed gems, but linked the lives of these young people of diverse African, Middle Eastern, and South Asian backgrounds with under-resourced youth from Cork's North Side, advancing the national conversation on immigration, belonging, and the future of Ireland. I'm going to play a short clip from that documentary featuring Andrea, and then CMC director Naomi Machete will explain how the CMC's applied arts practice research with CIPHER helped draw out the commonalities and, quote, shared humanity of the young people from the CMC.
So we are at Nana Legal Place in Cork, and we are gathering together with all the teenagers, mainly that we've been teaching for the past couple of years. Some of them, they live in direct provision, and some of them, they are just from the migrant background. We are just coming together and creating something which possibly will turn into a show in September.
Naomi Machete is Program Coordinator for the Cork Migrant Centre, or CMC, which works directly with the young people from Cork's direct provision centres.
We've been running this project for about 3.5 years. So if all the direct provision centres in Cork are in very isolated places, there's a stigma around living in direct provision centre. So in the same as the cyber project, it's all well and good to have the research, but when you are in these settings, you're applying it and you're seeing what it means to these kids. It maps really well with their sense of identity, with looking at the strengths that they bring, because when they are in the direct provision center, we're only looking at the deficit. We're not looking at them as people with nothing to bring, but people to be supported. But in here, they look at what they bring. And in terms of what they bring, they're just kind of is this collective where their own identity is kind of shared humanity.
This shared humanity, what Martin Luther King famously called an inescapable network of mutuality, at the heart of the Ubuntu project is at the heart of CIPHER, the CIPHER method's analysis of hip-hop's recontextualized archetypes and translated gems. Indeed, a trust in this Ubuntu mutuality is at the heart of CIPHER, not only in terms of community-centered ethics, but in terms of its method and theory centering on local global dynamics and subjectivities. As we'll see in concluding, this Ubuntu perspective is a particularly powerful tool for thinking about consciousness and subjectivization amongst people who, as Fanon notes, have been stigmatized through this structural, often racializing lens of deficit. Here I'd like to turn to some of my some gems drawn from my recent fieldwork, ethnographic work that has been packed into the last year as COVID restrictions were lifted and global travel became less fraught. In so doing, I'm going to try and weave a thread to model these Ubuntu connections in theory and practice across what Sami Alim has called the global hip-hop nation, this global cipher of hip-hop artists and their communities. I'm going to start with my freshest experiences in Mozambique, from which I returned just 2 weeks ago. I'm going to start spinning my web in Southern Africa by picking up the thread of Ubuntu, a word, of course, meaning humanity, that's a cognate of the word Bantu, the language family comprising Zulu, Xhosa, Shona, Swahili, and a wealth of other sub-Saharan languages. I start here because our recent trip to work with Mozambican hip-hop artists in putting on that country's first national and international hip-hop conference, spearheaded by Marie Curie fellow Yana Rantala, coincided with the tragic loss of the country's most important hip-hop pioneer, a rapper by the name of Azagaya. Important for our discussion here, that MC, shown in the middle here, got his start as the founder of the hip-hop duo Dinastia Bantu, or Bantu Dynasty, in the post-colonial lingua franca of Portuguese. While in the colonizer's language, the name Bantu Dynasty is a gem of Pan-Africanism, a discourse furthered by the Pan-African hymn Nkosi Sikelele Africa that begins the album, played across the country and the continent in private and public, as fans mourned his death. That hymn, of course, is an iconic reference, a sonic reference, a gem of Pan-Africanism with purchase worldwide. Here's how his second album, Balbalasa, begins. His name, Azagaya, is another gem, for Azagaya means spear in the Bantu languages. Indeed, his partner in Dinastia Bantu was called Escuda, meaning shield. We've already seen one spear gem in the title of Pataphysics album, Tip of the Spear, bottom left here. In both cases, the spear is simultaneously a gem of war, of struggle, and a gem of indigeneity that together is read as a gem of anti-colonialism. Indeed, spears are everywhere in hip-hop knowledge for this very reason. From the title of Michael Franti's group Spearhead back to the legendary roots reggae icon Burning Spear. Indeed, the name for the first hip-hop organization, the Zulu Nation, is a group that got its name when founder DJ Africa Bambaataa was inspired by the spear-wielding anti-colonial Zulu warriors he felt an affinity for when he first watched the 1964 film Zulu. And yes, there's the Zulu Nation logo. There in the Zulu Nation logo is the Eye of Horus that we just saw. The other thread I wanted to spin from our time in Mozambique comes from a brief conversation I had with one of Yana's collaborators, the beatmaker and producer from Chimoio, Mozambique, named Imbelogic. Actually, I should say this is two threads, for I should first note that the colonial era name for Chimoio was Vila Peri, a name that the Chimoio artists at our conference were keen to explain has inspired countless reworkings and hip-hop deformations. One was a straight-outta Compton type notorious resignification of the city as Vila Perigosa, dangerous city, thus a resignification that bore the hallmarks of gangsta stylings. The other was the rather conscious and witty resignification from Imbelogic's album Peritajam, a play on the Portuguese word peritajam with an I, meaning expertise. For the album, on the bottom right here for you, featured expert MCs who were also experts on Chimoio. Again, Chimoio, the colonial name, the indigenous name for the colonial city Vila Peri, so Peritajam, experts. The second thread proved even more fruitful, for Imbelogic had also recently produced a beat tape under the auspices of a collective called Sonoridade Nativa. The beat tape was called Mozambeats. The album title's play was a nice English wordplay on the name of the country, but the concept of the beat tape and the name of its collective was even more rich with signification, rich with hip-hop gems and gem networks. As some of you might recognize already, the name Sonoridade Nativa includes another bit of English wordplay, the substitution of soul into the word sonoridade, Portuguese for sonority. With the modifier nativa, native, the construction makes a clear gesture to the indigeneity gem tag, but with the added layer of soul discourse mapped onto it. It articulated an Afro-diasporic musical connection that played on hip-hop's soulful African-American roots, of course, in English. And here's where it gets interesting. After hearing Imbelogic's thoughtful explanations of how his music on the Sonoridade Nativa project sought to remix indigenous musical sounds and concepts into a hip-hop context, I had to ask about the name. Because the name, Sonoridade Nativa, resonated deeply with the 1980s and 90s collective that all of us know went by the name The Native Tongues. This was the most famous hip-hop collective to come out of the US, an Afrocentric crew, themselves inspired and influenced by Bambaataa Zulu Nation. I asked Imbelogic whether there was a connection between the name of his project and the famed native tongues of Tribe, Queen Latifah, JB's, and De La Soul, and others. He replied, well, of course, they were and are huge influences, but no, he wasn't thinking of their US Afrocentrism, but about his musical project of leveraging local sonic heritages, beats made of mbilas and different local instruments. I pressed him, pointing out that the rebirth of the native tongues as the Soulquarians, but he continued, yes, I see what you mean. And of course, I know the Soulquarians too, Erykah Badu and Common and Questlove, among others. But, he continued, I suppose it was just a similar idea. I'm still thinking about what it means for an African beatmaker to have an Afrocentric focus that seems inspired by African American quests for roots through soulful musical practice. Suffice it to say, though, that it has everything to do with a post-colonial perspective in a country that Yana suggests continues to struggle with new local challenges and neo-colonial realities. In any case, it seems to me that something connected to, but beyond the Pan-Africanism of Azagaya's Dinastia Bantu and his intertextual gesture to Nkose Sikelele Africa. And of course, this African Afrocentrism comes replete not only with indigenizing anti-colonial rhetorics and sounds of indigenous idiophones, samples of Shona Chimurenga struggle music like Thomas Mapumo, but it also includes an image of a spear-wielding people from the Chimapere Stone Age cave paintings, a mere 40 kilometers from Chimoyo. This is on the left. This is a hyperlocal reference, not just to the idea of indigeneity, but to their particular indigeneity, 40 kilometers west of Chimoyo. Now, as Yana has pointed out, the Azagaya spear in southern Africa would traditionally refer to a hunting spear rather than an instrument of war. But in hip-hop's resignifications, the meaning is clear. This is a gem of indigeneity, self-reliance, and anti-colonial struggle. And as mentioned, it thus overlaps with a gem network around hip-hop's warrior spirit. I've written at length about MC battles and the history of the words as weapons gem in my Oxford Handbook chapter, Hip-Hop as Martial Arts, Hip-Hop as Martial Art. Indeed, there I establish how hip-hop's polycultural affinities for martial arts are not only well established, but also a global phenomenon, from New York to Berlin to Belfast. It was only earlier this year, however, that I got to examine East Asian hip-hop up close and personal, as I visited Japan and Thailand with CIPHER's Asia-Pacific hip-hop specialist, Jae Sung. While there are well-documented examples of, for instance, Japanese artists calling on their samurai heritage to find their authentic warrior voice in hip-hop, as Ian Condry has documented, it's just as likely for Japanese artists to call upon global hip-hop images, including mashups of gangsta, mobsta, and local yakuza imagery. That said, Jace introduced me to one of the most amazing localizing gems I have ever encountered, a mashup of Japanese heritage and hip-hop elements. DJ, MC, breaker, and graffiti artist. For here, in the center of the Kawasaki mural on the bottom right, we have two martial artists doing moves that look more like b-boy power moves than roundhouse kicks. There's what we might call a calligraffiti artist at right. And at left, we have the drummer and the shakuhachi player, who we might rightly assume to stand in for the DJ and the MC, respectively. Indeed, my colleague Alex Khalil mentioned that the monks here would indeed use the shakuhachi as a weapon. More on that in whatever Jason and I come up with for when we write on this piece from Kawasaki. But suffice it to say, we have this whole article planned on the mural and its commissioning as part of the Kawasaki City Council's move to position Kawasaki as a, quote, hip-hop city. The mural was commissioned as part of the city's ongoing branding as a diverse and youth-centered metropolis that took its status seriously as the home of a heritage site for hip-hop dance in the country. Indeed, we also spent time in the southwestern city of Kitakyushu, where we saw Rachel, watching b-boy and b-girl battles and Breaking for Gold qualifying series as the art form is set to enter the 2024 Olympics in Paris next summer for the first time. And we can talk about that, but there's a Global Hip Hop Studies special issue coming out in the next months on precisely that. Here's a little bit of hip hop's warrior spirit in action. Much more to say on that, of course, but I'll push on. A track that I was listening to that captured another aspect of the warrior spirit, the mystical stoicism of self-improvement captured in The Last Dragon's narrative of self-improvement and self-mastery. Forgive the wide generalization, but in the hip-hop context, it's apropos. For the other side of hip-hop's warrior spirit is the spirit of meditation and self-discipline, the yin quiet to the yang storm. The track I'm speaking of is by The Blue Herb and refashions a national poetic treasure into a hip-hop meditation. The original poem speaks of striving towards perfection against all odds, even as the poet Kenji Miyazawa lay on his sickbed at the end of his life in the 1930s. The track itself is a gem of discipline and a sort of master trope of hip-hop consciousness, knowledge of self. Indeed, we can see an appearance of the third eye in the second verse of the original. Excuse me, of the hip-hop version. This mysticism and discipline also reminds me of the gem of glowing light in KOS, reminiscent of The Last Dragon and Jusalim's Mesopotamian god mask. When Jace took me to Manhattan Records, that name, of course, an homage to New York and hip-hop's roots, the clerk working at this preeminent temple of hip-hop record stores in Japan explained that he was an MC with a crew called Tokyo Bang. He gave me some stickers, showed me his Instagram, and explained that his rapper name, Kaleido, comes from his given name, which means light in Japanese. He explained, quote, "I take my light and shine it through my art as an MC, diffusing that light in many ways, like a kaleidoscope." It was absolute poetry and is an absolute gem of hip-hop ways of knowing. On his recommendation, I also brought home a pair of DJ slip mats featuring the Shinto gods of wind and thunder, Fujin and Raijin, upper right on the slide here. It's another nice gem of spirituality and duality from hip-hop's well-developed material culture that somehow reminded me of the love and hate to brass knuckles from Spike Lee's classic hip-hop film, Do the Right Thing. By the time Jason and I got to Thailand for him to show me his home turf, I'd been listening to the music of Bangkok's breakout MC Rhyme Kamheng for weeks. The name, as you can probably see, is a hip-hop resignification of his neighborhood, Ram Kamheng, itself named after a 13th century Sukhothai king, now resignifies as Rhyme rather than Ram. Let's listen to the opening track from his recent double EP, as the track Two Sides of the Same Coin will keep us with this gem tag of duality, like love and hate, and perhaps recall our yin-yang discussion as well. But I want to play it mainly to give you a sense of how, like Imbalogic from Mozambique, he uses sonic gems of locality and here spirituality by using the metallophones of traditional Thai court music. If you've heard Indonesian gamelan before, this will sound a bit similar. And of course, the album art here is also a nod to traditional arts. I'll just play a second here.
นอนกองสลบมันกลายเป็นศพสยดสยองขบสมอโฟกุปางตกกระป๋องเสื้อขาดองมึงอดฉลองปลดถนอมสอง
All right, I don't know enough about Thai traditional music to speak to other musical parameters, but it strikes me that one of the structural features of the rapping on this tune is the trading bars between these two MCs on the track while constantly pushing the tempo. By the end of the track, the two rhyme at breakneck speed as the metallophones mark the passage of time with repeating structures. What I do know is that a very recent music video from Rhyme Kamheng is a veritable catalog of that the word Wat means temple, and the entire video is an homage to Muay Thai, aka Thai boxing. So even a non-expert can put it together that the track's title means something akin to temple of boxing. Indeed, as we'll see, this strategy of packaging Thai-ness in globally legible terms may very well be the point of this high production value project. In any case, it very clearly bridges the gap between warrior and spirituality gems that we've been tracking. commenting on inner and outer lives and yin-yang balance. Let's watch a brief clip, making sure to note the intercuts of quote-unquote Siamese fighting fish and the homage to hip-hop's ring announcer gems, such as LL Cool J's 1990 Mama Said Knock You Out and MIA's 2005 Bucky Dun Gun.
Roll the bonsai, go bankai, stare at you with two plus one eye. Everybody try to hate cause I'm tired, but nobody ever.
Of course, something else happened there, didn't it? Did anyone catch the 2 + 1 eye reference? This is the kind of heat mapping that I hope to do once we get to the computational side of the project at long last. I want to look at what discourses rely upon other discourses to track how they change and localize over time and space. I want to see how these gems emerge and how their reterritorialization in local life ways tells us about how these ideas were already there, how maybe hip hop was already there, as the Aboriginal Australian MC Wire put it. Okay, I want to wrap up this web of ideas, sounds, and images. Let's see, check the time, yeah. With a finding from Italy last spring. This was my first ethnographic trip after the COVID lockdowns lifted. On the first day in Bologna, on the bus from the airport, I caught a glimpse of a heavily graffitied wall just off the freeway on the edge of the city. I headed back to investigate the next day, spending an afternoon examining the impressive graffiti running the entire eastern flank of what turned out to be Arcoveggio Stadium on the outskirts of Bologna. I was struck by the diversity and skill of the work. It was clearly the result of a jam, those days where graph crews get together to practice their art. For one, the 2020 tags accompanying many of the individual pieces indicated a singular event. Furthermore, one set of pieces shared a common theme, commemorations of George Floyd. The graph pieces included Floyd's name with a halo above, as well as damning phrases like, "I love the way you lie," in English, and "Baise la police," notably a French variant of the gem, "Fuck the police," that of course has countless iterations the world over. Upon further inspection, I realized that the Floyd tributes painted in the midst of Italy's own COVID nightmare were by a graffiti crew called Hannibal Letters. I'd come to Italy thinking I'd see tons of resignifications of a proud Roman past, but was surprised to see there weren't many rappers who leveraged this world-beating imperial inheritance and cultural legacy in their lyrics or music. Outside, a few MC Neros and Colosseum references, Italian hip-hoppers seemed rather mum on this point. Instead, what I found, starting with this thread on the walls of the Arcoveggio Stadium, was the beginning of a very fruitful search for Hannibal gems in the world of Italian hip-hop. In Italian, the words Annibale, Elefanti, and Cartagine kept coming up, from top artists like Mahmoud to underground artists like Bacchus Bex. I asked Italian hip-hop journalist Pierfrancesco Pacora about this, and he immediately directed me to the classic album Figli di Annibale, Children of Hannibal. Of course, it makes complete sense in retrospect. For an anti-colonial, anti-imperial, and counter-hegemonics arts community, you're not going to find inspiration in the hegemon, but in the underdog. With the anti-racist activism of their George Floyd tribute, it made perfect sense as well. Of course, Hannibal Letters also has the benefit of playing on the Cannibale, Hannibal Lecter, but in this context, the signification was clear. Here was an underdog warrior from Africa, like those Zulus that Africa Bambaataa saw way back in the 70s. Here was a black general who had the audacity to cross the Alps and take the fight to the Roman Empire. What a fucking badass. What swag. What a warrior. Here he is with his troops in the middle top, and their spears, of course. I'll let you check out the lyrics from Figli di Annibale Almagretta, 1992, but just to highlight the last lines, if you know your story, you know where it comes from, the color of the blood running in your veins. That sangue misto, that mixed blood, brings us to the final section and point, I suppose, of this presentation. For Sangue Misto was the name of the first group that all my interlocutors in Italy pointed me towards. Pacoda and Marco Solaroli in Bologna, and Paola Attolino in Salerno. It was the work of Sangue Misto that helped me put together a thread linking the hip-hop gem, Foreigner in My Own Country, across time and space, and ultimately leading to a new view of the CIPHER method and its theorizations. So I conclude today's whirlwind tour with a gem of hip-hop knowledge that relates directly to the experience of post-colonial youth across Europe, the oft-translated gem, Foreigner in My Own Country. On hearing Denise Chila's brilliant recent track, Dual Citizenship, dual with an E, I was immediately reminded of a classic German hip-hop tune, the track Fremd im eigenen Land. I'm sure Jasper knows this one. The Chila track begins,
Where are you from originally? Where are you from? Originally.
my ear, that opening immediately resonated with the German tracks line, "Are you going back to your homeland?" To which the rapper, appropriately named Linguist, responds, "Where? Heidelberg?" Let's listen.
Ein echter Deutscher muss so richtig deutsch aussehen. Sauer auf, von der Fahrt, eine Gefahr. Gab's da nicht eine Zeit, wo schon mal so war?
Gehst du mal später zurück in deine Heimat?
Wohin? Nach Heidelberg, wo ich ein Heim hab?
Nein, du weißt, was ich meine.
Komm, lass es sein.
In this case, the point isn't that Chila has modeled her brilliant performative critique on the German track, but that both tracks express an all too common experience of being made to feel like a foreigner in their own country, a dual citizen, as Chila puts it, punning on the warring two-ness that W.E. Du Bois famously described in 1903 as double consciousness. As I say, in Italy, I then came across this classic that resonated directly with this interpolative network between Heidelberg and Limerick. In interviews about early classics of Italian hip-hop, everyone mentioned the group Sangue Misto and their track, Lo Straniero, wherein the hook posits the conclusion that, quote, "my position is as a foreigner in my own country," an almost verbatim echo of Advanced Chemistry's track. And in fact, the fact that it's the year after that Linguist and Torch track thing seems like it might be a direct influence. I haven't heard back from Torch on that question yet. Let's listen to Il Straniero.
Io quando andavo a scuola da bambino, la gente nella classe mi chiamava marocchino, terrone, uso, torno un po' da dove sei venuto, e questa è la prima roba che ho imparato in assoluto. La seconda...
As I hope to have shown in this web, in the web that I've spun over the last hour, hip-hop's an excellent site in which to examine the ways that not just ideas, images, and sounds, but feelings and experiences travel, translate, and take form across time and space. Chila's amazing example with our friend Andrea Williams' evocatively danced performance of greening up to assimilate to her own country, Ireland, is yet another expression of how hip-hop interpolates its subjects. Or as Fanon would put it, how hip-hop is a site of social genesis, of sociogeny. Indeed, while rereading Fanon with my former PhD student and current CIPHER Latin Americanist, Gustavo, I noticed another valence, even a potential source for the foreigner in my own country gem. In his 1956 letter to the resident minister in colonial Algeria, reprinted in the 1964 collection Toward the African Revolution, Fanon writes from his professional position as a psychiatrist, quote, "If psychiatry is the medical technique that aims to enable man no longer to be a stranger to his environment, I owe it to myself to affirm that the Arab, permanently an alien in his own country, lives in a state of absolute depersonalization. En étranger à son environnement, aliéné permanent dans son pays." I've emailed Torch, as I say, to ask if he or Linguist were reading Fanon back in '92, and it was Heidelberg, so it would have been available, but it matters little. as we can see, this gem has purchase. Like Du Bois' recognition and theorization of double consciousness 50 years before, this mid-20th century gem has called out to countless post-colonial subjects, resonated with them, taken on new local forms, new languages, and inspired new local gems of knowledge in lyric, music, image, and across the whole range of artistic performativities. As a remix culture, this post-colonial and polycultural third space is well known for sampling global and historical ideas and artifacts, recontextualizing them for local purposes. But as we've seen, it resonates particularly profoundly for people who have felt like a foreigner in their own countries, for reasons of racial subjugation, as well as ethnic or class marginalization, and increasingly, in hip-hop, for people who have been othered because of their gender, sexuality, ability, religion, or regional background. Like Shefkat, something about hip-hop's counter-hegemonic ways of thinking spoke to them, and to people like me, people who have a hunch or a feeling that something's amiss with the current order of things, the current party line, people who have come into consciousness with what Ralph Ellison once called an identity of passions. George Lipsitz does a service by tracking this line of thinking from Ellison to Paul Gilroy and elaborating its non-essentialist character when he writes in Dangerous Crossroads, quote, certain Afrocentric theorists might claim that the extraordinary capacity of African musical systems to capture the cultures of their colonizers proves the existence of a transcultural, transhistorical, essential culture within the bodies of Africans. But more accurate is Paul Gilroy's analysis that, quote, the African diaspora's consciousness of itself has been defined in and against constricting national boundaries, forcing a transnational consciousness. Gilroy notes Ralph Ellison's argument in Shadow and Act that the amalgamated cultures formed by the fusion of African identities with European, American, and Asian circumstances mean that, quote, it is not culture which binds the people who are of partially African origin now scattered throughout the world, but an identity of passions. Lipsitz concludes, the ability to find that identity of passions and turn it into a diasporic conversation, informing political struggles in similar but not identical circumstances, has enabled peoples of African descent to survive over the centuries. It may now also hold the key to survival for the rest of the world as well. And I think this similar but not identical gems, these similar but not identical gems that we've looked at, these globalizations, are precisely what he's talking about here. And I think, just in conclusion, that by looking at these manifestations of these identities of passion, in other words, these hip-hop agencies expressed in the four elements, across the four elements, and all of these knowledges tell us something about these identities of passions. And I suppose I'll conclude. Oh yeah, we won't even get into this one. Just wanted to conclude by saying that this is what we're hoping to do is by looking at these gems and mapping how these gems speak to each other and connect, that we can see where these identities of passions reside and find these sort of commonalities. In other words, that hip hop offers a structure in arts and cultures that people see that hip hop is speaking to them in their communities too. I'm going to leave it there, and I'll leave this screen up for just a second, but thank you all for having me, and I hope that made sense, especially at the end there.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. I'll stop recording now.